Imagine trying to build like a massive sprawling metropolis from absolute scratch.
Correct.
But there's a catch. You have no stone, you have no wood, you have zero access to metals.
Nothing.
Yeah, literally nothing. The only building material you have is mud.
Just some mud.
And the ground you are standing on randomly floods and tries to drown you while the sun beats down at over 100 degrees.
Oh, yeah, it's brutal.
So where do you even begin? I mean, how do you organize a society when the earth itself feels like it's actively rejecting you?
You know, you are describing the absolute definition of a hostile workshop.
A hostile workshop. I like that.
Yeah, it is an environment that essentially forces human beings into a corner where the only options are to invent entirely new ways of living. Or perish.
Or die. Yeah. Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today is Thursday, April 16th, 2026, and we are speaking directly to you, Tommy.
We've got an incredibly dense, fascinating stack of notes on the table today.
We really do. It's this massive document titled Tommy Sumerian City-States.pdf.
And Tommy, the reason we are so eager to unpack this with you today is because this is much more than just, a dry history lesson.
Right. It's not just dates and names.
Exactly. It's not just about an ancient civilization that lived between roughly 3000 BCE and 500 BCE in southern Mesopotamia.
Which is modern-day southern Iraq, right?
Modern-day southern Iraq, yeah. If we look at the core mission of today's deep dive, our goal is to explore ancient Sumer as humanity's ultimate prototype phase.
The prototype.
The original workshop. The Sumerians were the first to actively try and answer one giant, completely unprecedented question.
Which is?
How do human beings live together at scale?
Wow.
Because before them, there was no blueprint for a city. There was no manual for bureaucracy, no precedent for massive populations living shoulder to shoulder.
And Tommy, looking at the profile we have of your interests, this topic feels like it was literally tailor-made for you.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, you are a tinker, you're an imaginative architect, you are described as an agent of controlled chaos who thrives on building systems.
Turning raw possibility into a living world.
Exactly. And as we are about to see, the Sumerians were the original systems builders. They took raw chaos and engineered reality out of it.
They really did.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the ground they stood on because you really can't understand the bizarre systems they built until you understand the sheer terror of their geography.
Right. So if you picture southern Mesopotamia, you have to completely erase any image of a lush, easy paradise.
No Garden of Eden here.
No, not at all. It was a hot, flat, alluvial plain.
Just flat mud.
Yeah, the soil was incredibly fertile river mud deposited over millennia by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
Okay.
But aside from that mud, they had almost nothing.
Wait, like actually nothing?
No timber forest to cut down for building, no quarries for stone, no copper or tin mines.
I'm struggling to understand why anyone would settle there in the first
It
place.
seems counterintuitive, right?
Totally. Because if I'm a nomadic hunter-gatherer or, an early farmer looking for a place to set up camp, I want a forest. I want rocks to build a wall.
Sure.
If it's just baking mud and marshlands, why not keep walking north where it actually rains?
Well, it's because the potential of that river mud was simply too massive to ignore.
Okay.
The soil, if you could just get water to it at the right time, was explosively productive.
Like super high yields.
Exactly. But the caveat was the unpredictability.
Ah.
The rainfall in southern Mesopotamia was nowhere near enough to sustain agriculture on its own. You couldn't just throw seeds on the ground and pray for rain.
You'd starve.
You'd absolutely starve.
Yeah.
And the rivers themselves were deeply treacherous.
Because they fled, right?
Right. But the Tigris and Euphrates don't flood on a gentle, predictable schedule like the Nile does in Egypt.
Oh, I see.
Their floods are violent,
Yeah.
sudden, and they often come at the exact wrong time for the harvest.
Man, it's like trying to build a massive tech startup, but your only raw material is mud, and the server room floods randomly without any warning.
That analogy hits the nail on the head.
You have to invent project management just to survive the week.
You really do. You cannot survive an environment like that with a loose, decentralized group of farmers doing their own thing.
Just hoping for the best.
Right, because if one farmer builds a dam to protect his field, he might inadvertently flood his neighbor's field.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So to survive, they had to build massive, interconnected irrigation systems. We are talking about vast networks of canals, levees, reservoirs, and drainage ditches.
And building that infrastructure requires what? Collective labor.
Yes, collective labor. It requires a central planner.
Wait, let's look at the logistics of that. How are they digging massive canals without metal tools?
Good question.
If they don't have bronze or iron shovels, what are they even using?
Mostly baked clay sickles, wooden spades if they could trade for the wood, and bone tools.
Oh my God.
It was brutal, back-breaking physical labor in searing heat. And digging the canal is only step one.
There's more.
Oh yeah. Canals in an alluvial plain silt up incredibly fast.
Because of the mud.
Right. So every single year, you have to organize thousands of people to get down into the mud and dredge the canals by hand, or the water stops flowing and everyone starves.
So the environment wasn't just like a backdrop, it actively pushed people toward bureaucracy.
Exactly. The geography forced them into cooperation.
The cities didn't rise in spite of the harsh landscape. They rose entirely because the landscape demanded rigorous, unrelenting coordination.
That's it. If you didn't coordinate, you drowned in a flood or you starved in a drought.
That's wild.
And this creates a compounding effect. When you have thousands of people digging canals, you have to feed them.
Right.
You have to allocate rations. You have to decide who gets water on what day. You need strict rules for how land and resources are distributed.
So you need administrators.
You have to invent administrators, overseers, and a central authority. The mud and the water literally birthed the concept of the state.
Okay, so you have thousands of people sweating in the mud to build these canals. To keep them from dropping dead, you need calories.
Lots of them.
Lots of calories. And that immediate caloric deficit is what forces them to invent an entirely new agricultural economy.
Yes.
Which shifts us into the mechanics of how they actually manage to pay for all this.
Right, because the Sumerian economy was entirely built on the back of this irrigated agriculture. Because they managed to tame the rivers, they generated an enormous agricultural surplus.
Okay, what are they growing?
They grew dates, flax for textiles, and they raised livestock like sheep and goats.
Yeah.
But the absolute powerhouse of their economy, the foundation of everything, was barley.
Wait, barley, not wheat.
Barley.
Really?
Yeah, wheat was grown, but barley is uniquely resilient. It can tolerate the harsh, dry conditions.
That makes sense.
And most importantly, it is highly tolerant of salty soil, which, as we will discuss later, became their single greatest existential threat.
Oh, wow.
Barley was so reliable, so universally needed for bread and beer, that it transcended being just food.
What do you mean?
It effectively functioned as a baseline unit of payment. It was their currency.
Are you serious? Imagine paying your taxes or buying a house with, like, wheelbarrows of grain.
That's exactly what they did.
But this brings up a massive logistical gap in my mind. You mentioned earlier they have no stone, no timber, and no metals.
Right.
If they are just sitting on a massive pile of barley and mud, how are they getting the copper for weapons or the timber to build temple roofs?
Well, they had to trade for it.
With who?
Because they lacked those foundational raw materials, the Sumerians were forced into a proto-global network.
Oh, interesting.
They took their massive surplus of grain and the textiles they manufactured from sheep's wool, and they exported them. In return, they imported timber from the Levant, stone from the mountains, copper, and luxury goods like lapis lazuli.
I am still stuck on the transportation.
How so?
If I don't have wood for a cart and I only have grain, how am I transporting tons of barley hundreds of miles across the ancient Near East?
Good point.
I mean, I can't carry 50 pounds of grain on my back across the desert.
No, you used the river. The Tigris and Euphrates were the superhighways of the ancient world.
But with what boats? They have no wood.
They built reed boats.
Reed boats?
Yes,
Yeah.
sealed with naturally occurring bitumen pitch to make them watertight.
That is so clever.
They could load massive amounts of grain onto these boats and move them up and down the rivers. And for overland routes, they relied heavily on pack animals, specifically donkeys.
And who exactly are they trading with? You mentioned it was proto-global.
The sources show a staggering geographic reach. They were connecting with places like Elam to the east in modern-day Iran.
Okay.
They traded with Dilmun, which was a major mercantile hub in the Persian Gulf, likely modern-day Bahrain.
Wow, so pretty far south.
Yeah, and they reached Magan, which is modern-day Oman, for copper.
Oman?
Yes, and they even traded with Maluha, which historians strongly link to the Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan and India.
Wait, we are talking about 3000 BCE, and they are moving goods across vast international distances.
Exactly.
But here's the thing that really catches my eye as a system builder. If you have this massive proto-global trade network. And you are managing thousands of laborers dredging canals.
Right.
And you're calculating payments in tons of barley. Human memory maxes out.
It absolutely does.
I mean, a chieftain can remember who owes him 3 sheep. He cannot remember complex, multi-year trade contracts with Elamite merchants while tracking the daily barley rations for 5,000 canal workers.
Human memory simply cannot scale to the level of an institutional economy.
It's impossible.
The sheer overwhelming necessity to track surplus grain, manage these trade contracts, and organize labor led to what the source material calls one of human history's quietest but greatest revolutions.
Which is?
To solve the problem of scaling memory, they invented the clay tablet.
Ah, the invention of cuneiform.
Yes.
I really want to push back on something here, or at least clarify it.
Sure, go ahead.
Because I think a lot of people have a deeply romanticized view of history. When we think of the invention of writing, we imagine poets trying to capture the human soul, or priests writing down the whispers of the gods.
Right.
But looking at these notes, writing was basically invented by ancient accountants trying to keep track of barley and sheep.
It shatters our modern romantic notions entirely, but yes.
That's hilarious.
The very first written marks in human history were not capturing epic poetry or deep philosophical musings. They were essentially Excel spreadsheets.
Just literal receipts.
They were receipts. Cuneiform began strictly as a system of administrative record-keeping. The earliest tablets are literally just tallies. This many sheep belonged to this temple. This much grain was dispersed to this overseer.
Wait, how did it actually work mechanically? Why wedge shapes? Why didn't they just draw a little picture of a sheep and put 3 dots next to it?
Well, they actually started with pictograms drawing little pictures.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, but if you try to draw a curved line in wet river clay using a stick, the clay clumps up.
Oh, it gets messy.
It ruins the image.
Oh.
It's incredibly slow and frustrating. So over time, an administrator realized it was exponentially faster to take a cut reed, which has a naturally triangular edge, and simply press it straight down into the clay rather than dragging it.
So the medium dictated the design. Pressing a reed makes a wedge shape.
Exactly. And cuneiform literally means wedge-shaped.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And because you are just stamping patterns of wedges, you can write incredibly fast. It was all about tracking goods, labor, and transactions efficiently.
It's scalable.
Right. But Tommy, as someone who builds systems, you know what happens when you introduce a powerful new tool to solve a specific problem.
The tool inevitably escapes its original purpose. You invent a tool for the accounting department, and suddenly you realize the tool can decode the universe.
Yes. Once the technology of writing existed, it didn't stay trapped in the storehouses. Over centuries, they started using these wedges not just to represent goods, but to represent sounds.
Syllables and stuff.
Right. And once writing became phonetic, they could write down spoken language. They adapted this tool invented to count sheep, to write down literature, to codify complex legal systems, to conduct international diplomacy, and to record their myths.
That is just incredible. But you can't have complex accounting without a robust mathematical system.
No, you can't.
You can't calculate compound interest on a grain loan or engineer a levy system just by guessing.
You're absolutely right. The Sumerians developed a highly sophisticated mathematical system with place value tendencies. But the most fascinating part is that they used a base 60 numerical system, sexagesimal.
Okay, I have to stop you. Base 60.
Base 60.
We use base 10, presumably because we have 10 fingers. Why on earth would anyone choose 60? It seems incredibly difficult to memorize.
Well, it actually makes perfect mathematical sense for an administrative society.
How so?
60 is a highly composite number. It can be divided cleanly by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30.
Oh, I see.
If you are an ancient administrator trying to divide up grain rations or land parcels among different groups of laborers, base 10 is a nightmare because 10 can only be divided by 2 and 5.
So you get all these messy fractions.
Exactly. Base 60 allows for incredibly easy fractions.
That is brilliant. But wait, how do you count to 60 on your hands? Because that seems like the barrier.
It's actually really clever. You use your thumb to point to the 3 knuckles on each of your other 4 fingers.
Okay, let me try that. So 4 fingers, 3 knuckles each. That gives you 12.
Then you use the 5 fingers on your other hand to keep track of the multiples of 12.
Ah, 5 times 12 is 60.
You can count to 60 perfectly just using your hands.
It's haunting to think about. Every time I set a 60-minute timer on my phone or look at a 360-degree circle, I'm using the exact mathematical framework some ancient administrator invented to dole out grain without fractions getting messy.
The ghosts of Sumerian accountants are embedded in how we perceive time itself.
That is so cool. Okay, so we've got the mud, we've got the sprawling canals, the barley currency, the trade networks, the spreadsheets, and the math.
All the pieces are there.
But you don't get thousands of people working together in a highly regimented system just by asking nicely.
No, you definitely don't.
Someone has to be in charge. Someone has to enforce the contracts and command the labor. The spreadsheet needs an administration.
And to understand their political administration, we have to look at how they structured their society. Because Sumer was not a single unified country.
Right.
It wasn't an empire with a capital city and a monolithic government.
It was more like a network of autonomous nodes.
Yes. A fiercely competitive network of independent city-states. We're talking about massive urban centers for their time, places like Uruk, Lagash, Kish, and Nippur.
So each one is its own world.
Exactly. Each of these city-states operated almost like its own sovereign nation. They each had their own ruler, usually holding the title of Lugal, which translates roughly to big man or king.
The big man.
Yeah, the big man. Or an enzi, which was more like a governor or high priest.
But a king in ancient Sumer wasn't just a politician or a warlord.
No, you cannot separate politics from religion in Sumer. The two concepts were fused at the atomic level.
How so?
Each city-state had a specific patron god. The city literally belonged to that deity. The land, the temples, the people, they were the estate of the god.
So what was the king?
The Lugal or Ensai governed simply as that god's earthly representative. They were basically the estate manager.
Man, let's talk about the Sumerian worldview because their religion was incredibly intense.
It really was.
They had a polytheistic pantheon. Gods like An, the god of the heavens, Enlil, the god of air, storms, and the ultimate authority of kingship.
Right.
Enki, the god of fresh water, wisdom, and magic, and Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and political power.
The big players.
But when you read their myths, the universe they describe isn't a comforting place.
No. The Sumerian universe was seen as fundamentally ordered, but highly unstable and deeply indifferent to human suffering.
Which makes sense.
Right. Remember the unpredictable floods, the scorching heat, the constant threat of starvation if the canals failed?
Yeah, the hostile workshop.
Their theology mirrored their environment perfectly. They believed that humans were created for one specific purpose, to do the physical labor that the gods didn't want to do.
So humans were essentially created to be cosmic maintenance workers.
That is exactly how they viewed themselves. They existed to serve the divine order, to maintain the temples, to provide sacrifices, and to hold back the forces of chaos. Yeah, the gods were not loving parental figures in the modern sense. They were more like forces of nature, powerful, terrifying, and prone to erratic, destructive behavior if they felt disrespected.
Or just annoyed, right.
Or simply annoyed by the noise humans made.
If I'm a Sumerian farmer, I'm not seeking a deeply personal, comforting relationship with Enlil. I'm terrified of him. I just want him to keep the floodwaters away from my barley.
Exactly. Keep your head down and do the work.
If the gods are that unpredictable, and the afterlife, as the notes mention, is just a dim, bleak, dusty underworld where you eat clay regardless of whether you were a king or a beggar,
Very bleak.
was religion for them less about spiritual enlightenment and more about cosmic hazard insurance?
Cosmic hazard insurance captures the exact psychological reality of their faith. Religion was a highly practical external framework for surviving a volatile world.
You pay your premiums in barley.
Literally.
Yeah.
You feed the gods with sacrifices so the gods keep the universe running. And this directly tied into the authority and the immense burden placed on the king.
How does the king fit into that hazard insurance policy?
Because the king's authority was a fusion of sacred duty and practical logistical control. A king wasn't just a military leader expected to defend the walls.
Right.
He was the chief steward of the divine estate. Part of honoring the gods meant physically keeping the massive irrigation canals running. It meant ensuring the agricultural surplus was collected and distributed properly.
Wait, so if a levee breaks and floods the fields or a drought hits, that's not just a natural disaster, that's a theological crisis.
It meant the gods had withdrawn their favor from the king had failed in his stewardship, order had been constantly, relentlessly defended against chaos.
Oh, man.
If the physical systems failed, the spiritual legitimacy of the ruler collapsed instantly. The pressure on the ruling class to maintain the infrastructure was absolute because infrastructure was their religion.
That is an unbelievable amount of pressure to live under. You have the cosmic anxiety of erratic gods, the political anxiety of keeping the king in favor, and the physical anxiety of the entire city starving if a canal gets choked with silt.
Yeah, it was a pressure cooker.
We know what the kings and priests were doing. They were organizing labor and offering sacrifices. But what did a random Tuesday look like for the average person living under this immense grinding system?
To understand the texture of daily life, we have to look at the severe social stratification. At the top, you had the ruling elites, the high priests, and the royal family.
Well, 1%.
Exactly. Below them were the scribes and administrators who ran the massive bureaucracy. Then you had a middle tier of merchants and specialized artisans.
Okay.
But at the very base, carrying the weight of the entire civilization was the vast majority of the population: farmers, laborers, and dependent or enslaved persons.
Most of whom are living in the mud brick houses we mentioned. I want to zoom in on those houses.
Sure, they were modest homes, but surprisingly well-engineered for the harsh climate.
How so?
They were built around a central open-air courtyard. The mud brick walls were incredibly thick, which provided crucial thermal insulation against the brutal Mesopotamian heat.
Like ancient air conditioning.
Exactly. And they deliberately had very few external windows.
To keep the heat and the dust out.
Yes, it offered privacy, but primarily it controlled the internal temperature. And they utilized flat roofs, which became essential living space.
Oh, because it was cooler up there.
Right. In the intense heat of the summer, families would often sleep on the roof to catch the cooler night breezes.
What are they eating while they hang out on their flat roofs after a brutal day in the fields?
The diet was heavily reliant on what they could grow in the harsh soil. They ate a lot of unleavened barley bread, thick barley porridge, dates from the date palms that lined the canals.
Onions, lentils.
Yes, onions, lentils, and fish they caught from the rivers. Meat, like mutton or goat, was a rarity for the average person, usually reserved for festivals or the elite.
Okay, pretty standard ancient diet so far.
But the absolute staple of daily life, the fluid that kept the entire society moving, was beer.
Yes. I noticed this detail in the notes, and I need us to explore it. Beer wasn't just a recreational drink for a Friday night out. It was a foundational pillar of their diet.
Beer was consumed daily by everyone, including children.
Including children.
Including children. It was a thick, cloudy brew, often with pieces of bread or grain still floating in it. They would drink it through long reeds to filter out the chaff.
So it's more like a soup.
Yeah, it was calorically dense, providing essential carbohydrates and nutrients. But more importantly, the water in the canals and rivers was often stagnant or contaminated.
Ah.
The fermentation process of brewing beer actually killed off pathogens, making it a much safer alternative to drinking raw water.
So brewing beer was essentially an ancient water purification technology.
Exactly. It was hydration, nutrition, and cultural glue all rolled into one. Workers were often given daily rations of beer as part of their wages.
But obviously, life wasn't just sitting around drinking beer and eating dates. The labor obligations were intense.
Yeah.
If you're a farmer, you're not just working your own plot. You owe labor to the temple or the state.
It was a system of corvée labor.
You mean forced labor.
Right. The state could draft you for massive public works projects, building a new ziggurat, fighting in a border skirmish, or the endless, unending task of dredging the canals.
Sounds exhausting.
It was a deeply patriarchal society as well, though it's worth noting a fascinating nuance from the sources. Elite women, particularly high priestesses, could wield massive political and economic influence, managing vast temple estates.
That's interesting.
But for the average commoner, life was an exhausting cycle of physical labor dictated by the agricultural seasons.
Let's say I'm an average person and I want to escape that physical labor. I don't want to spend my life dredging mud.
Okay.
The only real way out is to become a scribe, to join the administration. But looking at the notes, the scribal schools don't sound like a walk in the park either.
The scribal schools, known as the Aduba, which translates to House of Tablets, were notoriously brutal.
Really?
Oh, yeah. If you were a young boy sent to the Aduba, your life consisted of intense discipline, corporal punishment, and endless mind-numbing repetition.
So just copying signs over and over.
You had to memorize hundreds of complex cuneiform signs. You spent hours pressing a reed into clay, smoothing it out, and doing it again until you achieved absolute machine-like perfection.
So it's a different kind of grueling labor. You trade the physical exhaustion of the fields for the psychological and physical discipline of the academy?
Essentially, yes.
But whether you were a farmer, a scribe, or a king, everyone in Sumer was dealing with one inescapable reality. Tommy, this is where the systems thinking really gets dark.
It does.
Because Sumer wasn't just a civilization of creation. It was a civilization of continuous, desperate maintenance.
This is one of the most vital insights in our entire stack of notes. When we think of ancient civilizations, we tend to think of monuments that were built once and stood forever.
Right, like the pyramids of Egypt.
Exactly. But in Sumer, because everything was made of mud brick and because the environment was so aggressive, everything was constantly decaying.
If you don't maintain a mud brick wall, a heavy rainstorm will literally melt it back into the earth.
Right. The canals fill with silt, the levees erode.
It's all so fragile.
Civilization required continuous, unending effort just to stay functional. They were running on a treadmill that was slowly speeding up.
Wow.
But the most insidious problem they faced wasn't the floods or the decaying walls or even neighboring armies.
What was it?
It was a slow, invisible, ecological killer brought on by their greatest technological triumph, the irrigation itself.
The salt.
Soil salinization.
Oh, man.
When you heavily irrigate land in a very hot...
The very system that created their civilization, the irrigation that gave them the surplus to build cities and invent writing, was slowly poisoning their soil with salt.
slowly killing them.
It's like engineering a high-performance engine, but knowing that every single mile you drive is slowly melting the cylinders.
This is a profound, slow-motion ecological tragedy. As the salt levels in the soil rose, the crop yields began to drop. Wheat, which is highly sensitive to salt, began to fail completely.
So that's why they had to rely on barley.
Exactly. The earth literally turned white with salt crusts. They had to switch almost entirely to the more salt-tolerant barley just to stave off starvation.
But even barley has its limits, right?
Yes. The system that gave them life was fundamentally unsustainable over the long term. They were trapped by their own success.
You have this society living with the constant anxiety of erratic gods, doing grueling physical labor to maintain canals that are slowly poisoning the earth with salt, and trying to manage it all with clay spreadsheets while competing with neighboring cities.
Just a little bit stressful.
Right. But living in this intense, claustrophobic pressure cooker created some incredibly dynamic historical figures. People who had to navigate this chaos and justify their role.
Which forces a fascinating shift in how we look at early history. Up until this point, we've been talking about massive structural systems. Geography, economics, class structures, ecology.
Right.
But Sumer is the place where humans first turned rulers into characters and where they turned memory into narrative identity.
I want to break down what you mean by turning a ruler into a character, because the notes explicitly state that in Sumer, history is structural, not moral. There are no pure heroes and no pure villains in their records. There are only roles.
Exactly. When we look at modern history, we often try to assign moral weights, good guys and bad guys. But the Sumerians didn't write history to provide moral instruction.
Why did they write it?
They recorded history to justify the current power structure and to explain their relationship with the gods. We see people embodying essential roles that the civilization needed to survive the chaos we just described.
Let's walk through this roster of roles, because these names and what they represent are incredible. First up, we have the heavy hitter, Gilgamesh.
Gilgamesh.
King of Uruk, reigning somewhere around 2700 BCE, the notes list him as the mythic seeker.
Gilgamesh is a fascinating figure because he straddles the line between historical reality and absolute myth.
So he was real.
He was very likely a real historical king of Uruk who built massive city walls. But in the cultural memory, he became something much larger. The central figure in the Epic of Gilgamesh, widely considered one of humanity's oldest written literary stories.
And if you read the epic, he's not exactly a noble, heroic Boy Scout.
Not at all. He begins the epic as an arrogant, abusive tyrant who exhausts his own people with forced labor.
Yikes.
But the story tracks his transformation. Through the death of his closest companion, Enkidu, Gilgamesh is forced to confront his own mortality.
And he goes on this huge quest.
Right, he goes on a desperate quest seeking eternal life, only to fail. He represents early kingship at its most raw and powerful, but also its most terrifyingly human. He isn't remembered for his tax policies. He's remembered because his story explores what it means to be mortal and powerless in the face of the gods.
Then we move from the mythic to the concrete. We have a guy like Enmebarage, king of Kish, around 2600 BCE. He's listed as the administrator.
Right, and Enmebarage is crucial for historians because he is one of the earliest rulers we can actually confirm archaeologically.
Meaning we found stuff with his name on it.
Exactly. We have found inscriptions bearing his name. He isn't shrouded in myth and monsters like Gilgamesh.
So what did he do?
He represents the moment when kingship moves from legend into verifiable stone-carved bureaucratic record. He consolidated power, established military dominance, and built early temples. He is the system manifesting in a real person.
And then there's Ur-Namsha, king of Lagash, reigning around 2500 BCE. The builder, I am obsessed with the image the notes have for him.
That's a great image.
He's depicted in stone carvings literally carrying a basket of mud building materials on his head.
Yes, that image is a masterclass in ancient political propaganda.
How's
By depicting himself carrying the building basket, Ur-Namsha is reinforcing the exact theology we discussed earlier.
that the king is a worker?
Exactly. The king is not above the labor. The king is the humble servant of the gods and the ultimate provider for the city. He is defining his leadership through construction and maintenance.
He is visually tying his political legitimacy to the physical upkeep of the city.
That's precisely it.
And we absolutely cannot talk about these early figures without talking about Enheduanna, high priestess of Ur, living around 2300 BCE. She's listed as the voice, or the creator.
Enheduanna is a monumental figure in human history. She was the daughter of Sargon of Akkad,
Sargon, right.
and she was appointed as high priestess to solidify his political control over the southern Sumerian cities. But her legacy isn't just political.
No.
She holds the profound distinction of being the world's first known named author.
Wait, the first human being in all of recorded history to put their specific name on a piece of writing and say, I wrote this.
Yes.
That is insane.
It really is. She wrote passionate, complex, deeply personal hymns to the goddess Inanna. Before her, writing was mostly anonymous administrative spreadsheets or decrees issued by the state.
Just receipts and rules.
Right. Enheduanna represents the moment when writing becomes personal, when the tool of accounting becomes a medium for individual voice, theological exploration, and emotional expression.
Okay, so we have the mythic seeker, the administrator, the builder, the voice. But I want to push back on this idea that there are no heroes and villains.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because if I'm reading a history book, I naturally want to know who the good guys are. But the notes bring up this other guy, Enheduanna of Lagash.
Enheduanna.
He's famous for commissioning the Stele of the Vultures. This is a stone monument that literally depicts flocks of vultures tearing apart the severed heads and arms of his enemies. You're telling me this guy isn't a villain?
Well, if you ask the people of the neighboring city of Umma, the ones whose bodies were being fed to the vultures.
Yeah, I assume they'd say he's a villain.
Yes, to them, Enheduanna was a terrifying, devastating, apocalyptic villain. He slaughtered their soldiers and annexed their land. But you have to view history from the perspective of the people carving the stone.
Right. To his own people in Lagash.
To his own people, Enheduanna was the ultimate hero. He was the protector. He secured their access to water. He expanded their fertile farmland. He defended their city against aggression. The Stele of the Vultures was a monument celebrating a glorious, divinely ordained victory.
So history literally fractures based entirely on your zip code.
Exactly. There is no objective, neutral version of the story in Sumer. A hero in one city is a bloodthirsty villain in the city 10 miles down the river.
Wow.
And this ties perfectly into Tommy's profile as a world builder. Yeah. The Sumerians didn't just passively record events. They actively constructed narrative identities.
They were writing the lore of their own reality.
Yes, using writing, art, and monuments to interpret their existence, to justify their wars, and to try and make sense of the chaos.
But while these leaders were busy building monuments to themselves, inventing literature, and writing early propaganda, they were also plunging their cities into a state of constant institutionalized warfare. Which brings us to the actual mechanics of how they fought.
Yes, and we have to recognize that this conflict was completely baked into their geography.
Because of the water.
Because of the water. You have multiple, independent, highly populated city-states crammed into a relatively small alluvial plain. And they're all completely desperately dependent on the exact same river systems for survival.
So if I am the king of a city upstream, and I decide to build a new canal to water my fields, I am literally taking that water away from your city downstream.
Precisely. My agricultural boom is your starvation.
The math is brutal and zero-sum.
It is. They were constantly competitively fighting over water access, fertile borderlands, and vital trade routes. Warfare became a regularized tool of governance.
It wasn't an anomaly, it was a season.
Yes, a season. And the methods of warfare were surprisingly organized. We are not talking about chaotic brawls.
How are they fighting?
We are talking about disciplined infantry, armed with spears and large shields, moving in tight phalanx-style battle formations.
Wait, they were fighting in shield walls back in 2500 BCE.
Long before the Greeks made it famous, yes. They used early copper helmets, They developed siege tactics against walled cities.
Did they have cavalry?
They even deployed heavy, four-wheeled war wagons pulled by onagers, which are wild asses, which acted as early, terrifying shock cavalry to break enemy lines.
That sounds terrifying. The notes highlight a specific generations-long conflict, the border war between the cities of Lagash and Umma. This is considered one of the earliest recorded wars in human history. How did it start?
It was the classic ancient territorial dispute. Lagash and Umma were fighting over a specific tract of highly fertile land called the Goedina and the irrigation canals that watered it.
And this wasn't just a quick skirmish.
No, it was a grinding, escalated military conflict that spanned multiple generations. Treaties were made, treaties were broken, border stones were smashed, and thousands of men died over access to mud and water.
And Eadam, who we just discussed with the vultures, was a key figure who escalated this war.
He was, yeah.
But eventually, someone decides that fighting over border fields isn't enough. Someone looks at the fragmented map of city-states and says, why just defeat my neighbor when I can conquer all of them? Enter Lugal-Zaggisi.
Lugal-Zaggisi represents a massive shift in political ambition. Around 2350 BCE, he starts as the ruler of Umma.
Okay.
He eventually manages to conquer Lagash, Uruk, and several other major cities. He briefly unifies much of the Sumerian region under his single rule.
So he levels up.
He takes the concept of power scaling beyond the individual city-state and tries to forge a regional hegemony.
But his victory lap is incredibly short-lived. He unifies Sumer just in time for someone else to steal the prize.
Just as he consolidates his power, a new figure enters from the north, from a city that has never even been archaeologically located, Sargon of Akkad.
Sargon!
And Sargon completely disrupts the system.
Sargon defeats Lugal-Zaggisi. The notes say Sargon literally paraded Lugal-Zaggisi in a neck collar through the gates of the Temple of Enlil.
A very public humiliation.
Yeah. Sargon doesn't just unite a few cities. He creates one of the world's first true empires. He subjugates a vast region stretching from the Persian Gulf all the way up into modern-day Syria.
It feels like the Sumerian city-states were playing this intense multiplayer city builder game.
Exactly.
Everyone is stuck in a tense stalemate, trading, fighting over water, building walls, optimizing their barley output. And then Sargon suddenly kicks down the door, flips the board, and changes the rules of the entire game to empire mode.
The Akkadian disruption. Sargon shifted the paradigm from city-state rivalry to imperial centralized strategy. He installs his daughter, Enheduanna, as we discussed, to help culturally bind the empire.
Right.
But we also have to look beyond just Mesopotamia. The notes detail that Sumer's relationships with the outside world were incredibly complex. Let's look at Elam, located in the mountains to the east in modern-day Iran.
Elam perfectly illustrates the duality of ancient foreign relations.
How so?
They were a vital trade partner. Sumer desperately needed timber, stone, and minerals from the Elamite highlands.
Right.
But Elam was also one of Sumer's most terrifying and frequent enemies. Elamite forces would frequently sweep down from the mountains, launch devastating raids into Sumerian territory to steal the agricultural surplus, and then retreat.
Which provoked massive Sumerian military counterattacks.
Yes.
So you're sending merchant boats to trade with the exact same people who raided your border towns and burned your fields last season.
Ancient relationships were rarely clean binary categories. A neighboring region could be an essential economic ally, a bitter political rival, and a deadly military enemy, all depending on the season, the harvest, and the immediate needs of the state.
That is wild.
What this reveals is that human civilization was not born in a peaceful, harmonious vacuum. It was forged through intense tension, interaction, conflict, and desperate adaptation.
But you can only sustain that level of constant warfare, ecological poisoning, and systemic stress for so long before the cracks show.
Right. Eventually, the system breaks.
The heat in the pressure cooker was turned up too high for too long. Which brings us to the ultimate fate of humanity's first great experiment. How did the original prototype end?
Here we need to clarify a massive, pervasive historical misconception.
Okay, what is it?
When people ask, why did Sumer fall? They tend to look for a single dramatic apocalyptic event. A meteor strike, a massive, overwhelming invasion from nowhere, a sudden collapse.
Like Rome falling.
Right. But Sumer didn't fall like a chopped tree. It transformed, it hollowed out, it weakened, and eventually it was absorbed by the very cultures it helped create.
It was a slow fade. The notes describe it as interlocking gears of collapse. Walk us through those gears. Let's start with the internal rot.
The first gear, and arguably the most devastating long-term factor, was the internal environmental strain we explored earlier, soil salinization. Over centuries, the very earth they relied on became toxic with salt. Their agricultural base, the engine that funded their cities and their armies, was quietly eroding. By the end of the Sumerian period, crop yields had plummeted dramatically.
So they are slowly starving, generation by generation, unable to reverse the damage to the soil.
Yes. The second interlocking gear was the endless, resource-draining warfare between the city-states.
They just wouldn't stop fighting.
Even after Sargon's empire eventually fell, and the Sumerian cities briefly regained independence during what's called the Earth-Third period, they went right back to competing.
Wow.
They were expending massive amounts of blood, grain, and labor fighting each other, which prevented long-term unity and drained their economic reserves.
And the third internal gear.
The overcomplexity and extreme fragility of their systems.
Meaning what exactly?
When your society relies on thousands of miles of hand-dug canals that constantly need clearing of silt, and your administration relies on an incredibly dense, top-heavy bureaucracy to manage every single bushel of barley, the system becomes dangerously rigid.
Ah, I see.
If one part breaks down, if a localized plague hits the labor force, or a weak king fails to organize the annual canal dredging, or an enemy raids the supply lines, the whole system teeters on the edge of collapse. They lacked resilience.
So they are internally exhausted, starving, and structurally brittle. And that's when the external pressures finally break the dam.
Right. Around 2000 BCE, you have massive migrations of Amorite peoples, semi-nomadic groups from the west, moving into Mesopotamia in huge numbers, shifting the political and demographic structures.
Didn't they try to build a wall?
The Sumerian kings tried to build massive walls to keep them out, but it failed. And simultaneously, you have devastating invasions from their old frenemies to the east, the Elamites.
The Elamites are back.
They are back, and they famously sacked the great city of Ur, carrying away its king and completely shattering the political power of the Sumerian state.
Let me ask you a blunt question, because reading through this dense stack of notes, the Sumerians seem like absolute geniuses.
They were.
Yeah. I mean, they invented writing. They mapped the stars. They built massive cities out of mud. They invented base 60 math that we still use today. They built a proto-global trade network.
All true.
If they were so brilliant, why couldn't they engineer their way out of this collapse? Why couldn't they figure out the salt problem or establish a lasting peace?
That is the tragic, beautiful reality of Sumer. They didn't fall because they were stupid or because they lacked engineering capability. They fell because they were early.
They were early.
They were the first human beings to ever attempt this. They were experimenting with urban density, with sprawling bureaucracy, with intense irrigated agriculture at an entirely unprecedented scale.
And like any alpha prototype, it eventually revealed its fatal limits.
Exactly. You cannot engineer your way out of a problem when you were the first civilization to ever encounter that problem.
They had no historical precedent. They couldn't go to the library and read about how the Romans handled soil salinization because Rome wouldn't exist for another 2,000 years.
Exactly. They were flying blind.
Well,
They were figuring it out in real time, making it up as they went along. And while their political power collapsed, the culture did not vanish.
what happened to it?
By roughly 2000 BCE, Sumerian ceased to be an everyday spoken language on the streets, but it became a sacred, scholarly language, much like Latin in medieval Europe.
Oh, that's fascinating.
The Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, all the massive empires that followed in Mesopotamia absorbed Sumerian administrative techniques, their cuneiform script, their architecture, and their gods.
So Sumer became the foundational operating system that the rest of the ancient Near East ran on.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Which brings us to the final and maybe the most important part of today's deep dive, the legacy and what this all means for you, Tommy.
As we look at the ruins of Uruk and Ur, it all circles back to your specific profile as a tinkerer and an architect.
It really does. Sumer's story is the ultimate creative loop. The loop of building, refining, struggling, failing, and rebuilding. The Sumerians didn't start with a perfect plan. They took the immense pressure of their hostile environment, the mud, the unpredictable floods, the lack of resources, and they used that pressure as fuel for creative output.
They embraced the chaos and organized it.
They built an irrigation system. The system created an agricultural surplus. The surplus allowed for dense cities. The cities necessitated bureaucracy and writing.
The dense populations created conflict.
The conflict forced technological and political adaptation. And the cycle repeated, grinding forward, generating human civilization in the process.
They didn't demand a perfect, pristine outcome before they started building. They found profound meaning in the messy, brilliant, deeply flawed process of prototyping a world.
And their deepest legacy isn't an artifact you can look at in a museum. It isn't a ruined ziggurat or a clay pot.
No, their deepest legacy is purely conceptual. It is the very idea of the city as an administrative center. It is the concept of the receipt, the tax record, the written contract.
It is the radical notion that human beings can invent imaginary systems that are bigger than any individual and then convince thousands of people to live inside those systems.
Sumer proved that human beings can invent laws, bureaucracy, and economic value out of thin air and make them so profoundly real that millions of people live inside them for millennia.
It makes you wonder, as you go about your day-to-day, Tommy, looking at the world around you, dealing with the frustrations of modern life, which of the invisible, stressful, or brilliant systems that you live inside right now are actually just someone else's ancient first draft?
A fascinating question to leave on.
Truly. Thank you for bringing such an incredible, dense stack of sources to the table today, Tommy. This has been an amazing journey into the ultimate human prototype. Until next time, keep tinkering, keep building, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.